Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'm really pleased to have secured this important debate on behalf of the forgotten 500,000 immunocompromised and immune-suppressed patients in England and the 18,617 who signed the parliamentary e-petition calling on the government to fund the preventative COVID-19 drug Evusheld. I also want to start by paying tribute to the extraordinary campaigning work of Evusheld for the UK, Blood Cancer UK, Kidney Care UK, and all the other many charities that have given their members a voice. There is clearly very significant interest from colleagues across the House, and I will endeavour to take as many short interventions as possible. Mr. Chair, let me be blunt. The government has got this badly wrong. And some of our most vulnerable people are now in an impossible position, or as some of them have said, they've been left to rot. People with blood cancer, vasculitis, kidney transplants, multiple sclerosis and more, those with long-term conditions, rare diseases and those on immunosuppressant drugs, they are crying out for this preventative drug, Evusheld. Why? Well, for them, the COVID infection is just as deadly, in fact more so, than when we first went into lockdown 2.5 years ago, because they do not mount a response to COVID through the vaccines like the rest of us. So COVID isn't just a bad cold or an inconvenience, it's a killer disease. And in a society where people are allowed to walk around with this killer disease without being required to wear a mask, without being required to test or isolate, for the immune-compromised, nowhere is safe, not inside or out.
Would Laura give way?
I would give way.
With which she speaks. Does she agree that it is incredibly important that it is the clinicians and the scientists who take this decision through the usual rigorous methods and not us as politicians?
On that intervention, yes, I absolutely do. And in the course of my speech, I will outline all of the scientific evidence that backs the decision to procure Evusheld and roll it out right now, this side of Christmas. The Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and congratulate her on securing this very timely debate, because I was contacted by a constituent ahead of this that reiterated that as autumn and winter approaches, we are even more vulnerable and isolated. So given what is faced ahead, I'm sure the Honourable Member agrees that it is really urgent that ministers listen to what is being said in this debate and set out plans for how they are going to support immunosuppressed patients and people during this very difficult winter ahead.
Cooper.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. She's absolutely right. What I will seek to set out in my speech is not only that the scientific evidence backs up the case for Evusheld, but there is strong political consensus for it, and of course the voices of those who are affected must be heard. As I was saying, there is nowhere that is safe for these people. Not shops, not schools, not supermarkets, not buses, not even the very GP surgeries and hospitals that they need to visit to manage the conditions that make them vulnerable. They are at extreme risk of hospitalisation and death, and they have been left with no choice but to lock themselves away from family and friends for 2.5 years, and now many are facing a third winter of shielding. I would give way.
Thank you very much, and I agree with the sentiments, because I have a constituent who's been shielding for 30 months, 26-year-old, is the son of Mrs. Rihanna Patel, and so I would plead, along with you today, is that the government could continue to give serious consideration to the use of Evusheld to actually help those thousands of clinically vulnerable people across my constituency and the rest of the UK.
Thank you, Daisy Cooper.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. Let's move on to the facts. Is Evusheld safe and effective? Yes, it is. The MHRA approved it in March, 7 months ago. Is there enough scientific evidence? Yes, there is ample evidence. The drug is available for use. I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
Mike Penning.
Thank you for giving way, and we've had conversations about this with my own constituents. What I can't understand is that Rapid C19 committee have looked at this 11 times. These are supposed to be experts that are looking at. She's quite right, she's going on to evidence that proves that that committee is wrong. How come we've got into this situation that government scientists are saying one thing and the rest of the scientific community are saying something completely different?
Mr. Cooper.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for his intervention, and that is exactly a question that I would like the Minister to answer later. There are two significant problems with the most recent report, which was published last week. The first is that it effectively says that the Rapid C19 group looked at the results of a trial run on actual people last December 2021 and concluded that the evidence was so good that they were going to recommend that Evusheld got rolled out to patients. But then in May of this year, they looked at non-clinical data, test tubes and petri dishes and the like, and decided the results weren't good enough. Now, it doesn't take a scientist or a rocket scientist to work out that high concentrations of virus in a petri dish do not translate to tests in real human beings.
Would the Honourable Member give way?
I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
I understand 33 other countries have approved the use of Evusheld, including every other G7 member apart from the United Kingdom. What do you think we can learn from those other parts of the world that have approved this important treatment for the immunocompromised?
Cooper.
I'm grateful for that question. In fact, Evusheld is now so effective, not only has it been rolled out in 33 countries, but a number of countries, including Japan, Italy, Spain and Israel, have actually put in repeat orders for Evusheld. And the Centre for Disease Control in the US has actually launched a public drive to increase the uptake of it. Now, I'm very conscious that the Minister, in private discussions that we've had, indicated, and his predecessor, both said to me in meetings that there was some evidence that countries had bought the drug, but that they weren't using it. Now, let's be clear. The failure of any government to identify the clinically vulnerable patients and distribute the medication to them has nothing to do with the effectiveness of that particular drug. And before we throw stones in glass houses, we should also remember the immune-compromised patients in England who caught COVID and were referred to treatment, only 17% of them actually got it. So that failure to distribute is more to do with the fracturing of our health systems, not to do with the fact that this drug is very effective. I would give way.
Thank you for giving way and for bringing this vital debate for constituents who have contacted me, and also in my capacity as chair of the all-party health group. Does she agree that when people feel they're being left to rot, that it's not only the physical health that this is impacting, but we're also crippling people's mental well-being in the stage of recovery, where they need the most support possible?
Lisa Cooper.
I thank the Honourable Member for making that point. She's absolutely right. Many of these people are clinically vulnerable because they have a health condition, and their physical health is getting worse, because it would when you're caught up, we're stuck at home for 2.5 years. But the mental health impact is incredibly profound, and we know that many of our constituents have experienced suicidal thoughts as well. Now, I turn to the advice of the Rapid C19 Oversight Group, which has already been mentioned. Now, the government refused to share this advice for some time, and many of us were asking for it. And I was pleased to see that this advice was finally published last Thursday on the 6th of October. But I was pretty shocked for two reasons. First of all, because as I said, first the report actually says they looked at real-world data and impact on people, and that data was very strong. And then they looked at the data in a non-clinical setting and decided not to roll it out. That seems to me to be absurd. But there is a second problem with that particular evidence that was published last week. That study last week lists the evidence that the group reviewed, and it leaves out one very critical scientific study by the Francis Crick Institute, a study that I believe the government commissioned itself. Now, that study was commissioned to look at the effectiveness of a different drug, sotrovimab, and that report concluded that not only was sotrovimab effective, in fact, the government is using that report to justify why it continues to use sotrovimab. But the report also concluded that Evusheld was even more effective. So why not buy Evusheld too? Perhaps the Minister can enlighten us. And on the same day that the government published this Rapid Group report, The Lancet, the world's highest impact general medical journal, carried an article by 19 experts calling on the World Health Organization to update its guidance on Evusheld based on this study which the government commissioned. And these experts say, in The Lancet, that not only should Evusheld be used for preventative prophylactic use, but it should also be used for treatment too. So the UK government is really trailing behind. Can the Minister please tell us why the Rapid study ignores this vital piece of research which they must have known about? Now, many of the people we're talking about have had 5 or 6 vaccine jabs already, even though they will mount very little, if any, response. And the government says it's important that they get these vaccines because they say that some response is better than none. So why doesn't that same test apply to Evusheld? Why is it being singled out and being held to an impossible standard? Now, instead of following the science, let's look at what the government is proposing. Ministers have referred Evusheld to NICE for further clinical and cost-effective assessment. Apparently, we might hear back in April 2023. Another delay, another 6 months of isolation, even though every other COVID treatment and vaccine was urgently procured before being appraised. So I ask again, Mr. Chair, why is the government's treatment of Evusheld so inconsistent? I'll give way.
I'm extremely grateful. My constituent Helen Nash asked me to be here to support the case that she's making. But isn't that the key point? The government did a lot of great work to accelerate the availability of vaccines for the population at large, yet this particular cohort of the population seems to be subject to a very different set of criteria. And that's the great concern, that whilst we must rely on clinical advice, we must have the same sort of situation for all people, regardless of their status.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and I think one of the big concerns that hasn't been answered by the government so far is why their approach to this drug is so inconsistent compared to others. Now, as I say, ministers have referred this to NICE, and it's just really not at all clear why it is so inconsistent. But meanwhile, the Department of Health has proposed that immune-compromised patients should have an antibody test, and those that don't respond well enough could join an Evusheld trial. Let's be clear about what that trial actually means in real life. This trial would require some of the people who have been shielding to stay alive for 2.5 years to come out of shielding without any protection from the COVID vaccines like the rest of us, knowing that they might only be given a placebo. Mr. Chair, this is like taking lambs to the slaughter, and I would be astonished and appalled if this proposal passed anyone's ethics test. I don't know if the minister would support one of his loved ones taking part in such a trial, but I certainly would not. So can the minister tell us why his department wants to take this dangerous approach instead of the approach suggested by the Drug Safety Research Unit, who has called on the Secretary of State to roll out Evusheld now for this winter and to run an observational study of the impact? Another question that has arisen is, are there problems with supply? No. AstraZeneca has dismissed this claim. And finally, what will this cost? I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. I think she's presenting a very powerful case, and I congratulate her on securing this important debate. Max Johnson is a 14-year-old heart transplant recipient. He was the key figure in the organ donation campaign that was supported by members right across the House. Now, I know that Max and his family is being supported by their local MP, the Honourable Member for Edisbury, but we've kept in close touch. Since the start of the pandemic, Max's life has been turned upside down with no light at the end of the tunnel of isolation. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that Max, along with thousands of other people right around the country, has the right to a better life and should be allowed access to Evusheld without any further delay? Lady Cooper.
I completely agree. And on this issue of cost, the fact is that I don't know how much a dose of Evusheld costs, and I hope that the government, when it enters negotiations with AstraZeneca, will get a good price for the taxpayer. But what we do all know, all of us as members of this House, is what the cost is to our constituents who are affected. They have given up jobs. They have given up caring responsibilities. They have given up vital moments in their lives where they couldn't go to weddings or funerals or births. Some of them no longer run vital community, volunteer-led community services. Some have lost their lives. Some are suicidal and thinking of taking theirs because the psychological torture of prolonged shielding is too much for too many to bear. And these people are getting more ill because you can't be locked up for 2.5 years without getting problems with your back or your knee or experiencing extreme loneliness and mental ill health. And these are all problems that are piling up for our already overstretched NHS. And if these patients, the immune-compromised, get COVID, they are far more likely to end up in ICU, which we know will cost us thousands and thousands of pounds. And we also know there's a risk of variant escape because several studies show that new variants and virus mutations happen or more likely to happen in immune-compromised patients. So against this backdrop, Evusheld is the cheap option. Now, Mr. Chair, 2 years ago, members of this House stood in this very room and we begged health ministers to change their minds on care home restrictions, because the care home restrictions at the time were supposed to protect people, but they were so tight that some people started dying of neglect. Minister, we are at risk of that happening again. The government changed course after that debate 2 years ago, and it can do so again today. For the people who are affected by this, what they have right now doesn't feel like a life. It feels like a life sentence. Ministers have it in their gift to give these people their lives back. And I urge the Minister, in fact, on behalf of the 500,000, I'm begging him to do it today.
Minister to respond, Robert Jenrick.
It's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, Sir Gary, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for St Albans for securing the debate, and to the many honourable members across the House who have either intervened on the Honourable Lady or whose presence here on behalf of their constituents speaks to the level of concern and interest across the country. I come to this debate not merely as a new minister in the Department for Health, but as the minister who established the shielding programme in spring 2020 and who has been involved in these issues in one way or another for 2.5 years and cares deeply about the individuals who have been shielding since that time. And having met many of them, both as a minister and as a constituency member of Parliament, I understand the distress that they feel today and the psychological harm that leading cloistered lives is placing upon them and their loved ones. I also approach this with the view that the government should make decisions on COVID-19 treatments based on the available evidence and based on the recommendations of the medical experts that we have at our disposal. This has been the case with all of the COVID-19 treatments and is and should be the case with respect to Evusheld. It's imperative that we only deploy drugs which we are content are effective. We would be doing a disservice to the public to deploy drugs on the NHS that gave them, in this grave situation, a false sense of security. I'll make one further point, then I'll come to the Honourable Lady. That doesn't mean that there isn't a role for ministers to interrogate the evidence, to listen to contrary voices, both here in the House and in the public domain, and to ensure that we are getting all of the information that we need before we make these informed decisions. And that's the approach I've tried to take in the 3 weeks in which I've been in post and will take going forwards. But if I may, I'll go to the Honourable Lady first and then to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and on behalf of the 500,000 and one very special lady in my constituency, I wanted to ask, and I have carefully considered the government's response. It talks about the risks outweighing the benefits of deploying Evusheld at this point, and yet I've not really been able to understand what those risks might be. I understand the risks as outlined previously for not deploying. I wonder if he could speak to that, because as the Honourable Lady describes, my constituent is fighting for her career, she is fighting for her mental health, she's fighting for her relationships, and this debate is very important to her.
Minister.
Well, I hopefully will answer as many of those points as I can in the time available. I'll come to my honourable friend first, or next, and then I'll make some progress.
Dr. Luke Evans.
I entirely agree with the point of making sure we have clinically robust evidence. We saw in COVID with ivermectin how poor data actually influenced a debate right across the world. That being said, one thing we do have control over is how quickly we look at this regulation. Is there anything the Minister can do to speed that decision-making up? Because that is within his gift.
Minister.
Yes, there is, and I hope I'll be able to shed some further light on that in the remarks that I'll make. But given that there's relatively little time, sadly, for this debate, let me set out, firstly, the process which we've been through, which I hope gives some comfort to those here in the chamber and listening to the debate that this has been handled in a very rigorous way. Our regulator, the MHRA, gave conditional marketing authorisation to Evusheld in March 2022. But it did so, and I think this is an important point to note, it did so noting a lack of data regarding how it responds to the Omicron variant. The lack of supporting data has been noted by other respected regulatory authorities, including the European Medicines Agency and the FDA in the United States. And although it's the MHRA that licenses drugs, it is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, that assesses the clinical and cost effectiveness of them. So the normal process for a drug would therefore be that NICE proceeds to investigate Evusheld, and that is happening as we speak. As the Honourable Lady said in her remarks, that process is currently due to be concluded in April of next year. But yesterday, I met with NICE's Chief Executive, Sam Roberts, to review her work and to seek reassurances that her work could proceed at a faster pace. And she has committed to revert back to me as soon as possible with a new timetable. I will.
Just to welcome that development, and of course, just to place on record, of course, that the devolved governments also depend a lot of the advice on Rapid C, so I'm sure that the Welsh Government, along with the others, will welcome an accelerated timetable if possible, and I'd like to congratulate the Minister for doing so.
Minister.
The Honourable Member for that comment. Given the urgent need, and we all agree on that, to protect lives during the pandemic, we also expedited processes by creating Rapid C19 as a multi-agency initiative made up of the UK's main healthcare agencies, which was established in 2020 in response to the pandemic to get treatments, such as Evusheld, to the NHS patients quickly and safely. So we didn't simply leave the matter in the hands of NICE, but we asked Rapid C19 to review the evidence base for the use of Evusheld and to consider whether the evidence merited patients having access to it ahead of the normal NICE appraisal. The evidence has now been published and is available on gov.uk, and any emerging evidence will continue to be kept under review. That includes the CRIC data that the Honourable Lady mentioned, which was published in May and in August and is now being reviewed by Rapid C19, and also the Lancet study that she referenced that was published on the 6th of October, so relatively recently. There have been three types of evidence considered. The clinical data trial, which is generally the strongest source of evidence. However, in this case, the trial was carried out before Omicron became dominant, and so doesn't confirm efficacy for Omicron variants. And it would be, I think, concerning to deploy a drug on the NHS which hadn't been considered in light of Omicron. The in vitro... I will, but given I've only got 5 minutes remaining, that's the last time I'll be able to take something.
Vicky Foxcroft. An interesting speech, and I'm really inquisitive as to how we're still using vaccines that haven't been tested on Omicron, yet we're using the excuse of Evusheld not being tested on Omicron for those people who are immunocompromised.
Well, what I'm saying here is that before we deploy Evusheld on the NHS and give members of the public the sense of security that would come with that, it's clearly sensible for us to investigate that in light of the dominant variant that's out there. Otherwise, I think we would be giving people a false sense of security. We've looked at the vitro neutralization studies, and they can be completed much more rapidly than a clinical trial. and they measure in the lab how binding efficacy of the therapeutic is changed against a new variant. And these studies show reduced binding with different Omicron variants, which means the clinical efficacy against these variants is expected to be reduced. We've also reviewed the published clinical experience of the use of Evusheld, including the studies that are emerging from the United States and Israel. There can be difficulties with interpretation of some observational studies, for example, if there's not an appropriate control group. The conclusion of the evidence review is that there are uncertainties about efficacy, and so a clinical trial is now proposed to answer this. We are now working with AstraZeneca to see about the practicalities of creating an urgent trial that can help to inform the debate ahead of NICE's ultimate decision in early 2023. Other countries have introduced Evusheld, as has been noted, including in some cases before Omicron was dominant. Many have decided to double the dose to try to counter the reduced ability to neutralize the Omicron variant. But our experts consider that even at this increased dose, the evidence is still insufficient to demonstrate efficacy and could place individuals at risk if they were to change the protective behaviours that they've been doing for many months. The government recognises that an effective pre-exposure programme for immunosuppressed people would be valuable, but the scientific evidence doesn't support emergency deployment of Evusheld at the current time. To boost the evidence base for future decisions, clinical advisors in the expert groups and my department have recommended a clinical trial that could help us to answer outstanding questions on dose, on efficacy, and duration of protection in relation to the different variants. And as I say, we're currently working through the practicalities of that trial, and I hope that we can update colleagues and members of the public as quickly as possible. We've had great success in generating evidence in clinical trials. Last week, the initial results from the panoramic trial indicated early treatment with one drug significantly reduced recovery time, and we'll now work in the same way to understand what this evidence means for patient access to this drug. I appreciate the difficulties that immunosuppressed individuals face, particularly if they're concerned that they don't have protection from COVID-19 vaccinations, and so continue with behaviours to avoid COVID-19. We all recognise the impact this has on individuals' lives, and we want to improve their quality of life. The Antivirals and Therapeutics Task Force has ensured that UK patients have the earliest access to antiviral, antibody, and anti-inflammatory COVID-19 treatments. NHS patients were often the first in the world to receive safe and effective treatment in clinical trials and following regulatory approval. And that's the same approach that we want to follow here. Colleagues here and those listening at home can have my personal assurance that I will continue to work with our expert advisors in the department, with Rapid C19, to ensure that they review all emerging evidence, that the NICE process is conducted as swiftly as is possible, of course ensuring that it is safe and efficacious, because we want to ensure that members of the public who may ultimately receive this drug can have confidence that it does what they think it does for them. I will be holding for members of this House a meeting with our expert advisors tomorrow at 11 a.m. to give members of Parliament the opportunity to ask our experts, including those who've been part of the Rapid C19 process, any questions which they may have and seek further assurances. But I'm grateful once again to the Honourable Lady for raising this debate, for the passionate way in which she put the very strongly held feelings of members of the public, and I hope to work with her productively in the months ahead.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered the procurement of Evusheld. As many as that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you. Well done, Daisy.